Two rivers meet below us, and one of them is doing all the work. The Kinnickinnic comes down out of Wisconsin farm country through a gorge it cut for itself, and when it finally reaches the St. Croix, it lets go of everything it has been carrying. Sand. Tons of sand, year after year, until it has built a beach in the middle of a federally protected river, and squeezed that river down to roughly a quarter of its usual width. We are walking toward that sand. This is Kinnickinnic State Park in Pierce County, western Wisconsin, on a stretch of country where the water itself is the state line. Behind us is the city of River Falls. Downstream is Prescott, where the St. Croix ends and gives itself to the Mississippi. Across the channel is Minnesota. The park covers about 1,240 acres. The river that names it runs only about 22 miles from source to mouth, which makes what it has built here harder to believe, not easier. The trail starts on the bluff top in restored prairie, and the first thing you notice is how much air there is. The ground simply stops. The valley opens out below, and the St. Croix lies flat and wide in gray-blue between wooded walls. Volunteers planted more than 20,000 trees in this park and brought back roughly 50 acres of prairie. What reads as untouched wilderness is partly a repair job, patiently done, by people who wanted this view to survive them. Kinnickinnic is not an easy word, and it is not an English one. It comes from the Ojibwe Kinnickinnic, and behind it sits a family of Algonquian words meaning roughly that which is mixed. Kinnickinnic was a smoking mixture, leaves and inner bark blended together, often bearberry, prepared and burned across an enormous stretch of this continent. European traders and settlers heard the word, borrowed it, and hung it first on the plants, and then on the river, and then on this park. Turn away from the overlook, and the trail drops into the Kinnickinnic Valley itself, and the temperature falls with it. This is a different world from the prairie above. Cool air pools on the valley floor. Springs seep out of the walls. The state describes this place as a deep river valley cut into glacial drift, sandstone, and limestone, which is a very dry way of saying that a small river has sawed straight down through the entire history of the ground. Start at the bottom of that history. The sandstone and the limestone in these walls did not form in a river valley. They formed on the floors of shallow seas, hundreds of millions of years ago, when this part of the continent lay under warm salt water. Sand settled in sheets. Lime and shell hardened into rock. Then all of it went quiet, and stayed quiet, for a span of time that makes everything else in this story look like a single afternoon. You can read some of that in the walls as we pass. Where the rock is soft, it slumps and crumbles and grows moss. Where it is hard, it stands out in ledges, and the ferns take the shelves. Bulblet fern grows high on those shelves. Walking fern and common polypody hold the damp faces. Deeper in, a side canyon called the Devil's Mixing Bowl drops a small waterfall about 10 feet onto its own floor and keeps it cold down there all summer. What carved this valley came much later and came from the north. In the last ice age, lobes of the Laurentide ice sheet pushed down over this region, thousands of feet thick, grinding as they came, loading the land with the mixed gravel and clay that geologists call drift. Then, roughly 15 to 10,000 years ago, the ice began to fail. And a retreating ice sheet does not simply vanish. Before it disappears, it leaks. That leak is what we are walking inside of. Meltwater had to go somewhere, and everywhere it went, it cut. It cut fast, and it cut deep, because it carried grit and because it carried volume, far more water than any river here moves today. The St. Croix Valley you can see from the Bluff is not a valley the modern St. Croix could dig. It is an oversized channel, and the river living in it now is a tenant. The landlord was a lake. As the ice pulled back, it left enormous meltwater lakes trapped against its own edge, unable to drain north. One of them, Glacial Lake Duluth, filled the western basin of what is now Lake Superior. It had to spill somewhere, and its outlet was the St. Croix. For a while, this quiet river was the drain pipe for a body of water the size of an inland sea, and the shape of the valley still shows it. Hold that in your head while we walk. Everything gentle about this place, the ferns, the trout water, the sand, is sitting inside a scar. The proportions here are wrong on purpose. Geologists studying the lower St. Croix describe a valley shaped by several ice lobes advancing and retreating out of step with one another, and by repeated catastrophic drainings of glacial lakes. Not one flood, then. A long sequence of them, spread across thousands of years. Upstream from here at Taylor's Falls, that meltwater ran into hard volcanic rock and had to fight for it. It won. It drilled a narrow chasm straight through basalt, and the sand and gravel spinning in its eddies bored cylindrical potholes down into the stone, some of them as much as 60 feet deep. They are still there, dry and empty and standing open like wells. The place is called the Dalles of the St. Croix. Down here the river is doing nothing so violent. It is wide and slow and quiet, and you can hear a motorboat a mile away. That calm is also glacial in a roundabout way. To understand why the lower St. Croix behaves more like a lake than a river, you have to look at what was happening at the same time, a little to the west, in the valley of the Mississippi. Another glacial lake, Lake Agassiz, was draining too, through a torrent geologists call Glacial River Warren, roughly 13,000 to 11,000 years ago. When those great meltwater rivers finally slackened, the Mississippi could no longer carry away all the sediment it was handed, and its bed built up. That rising bed acted like a dam across the mouth of the St. Croix, and the lower St. Croix drowned. The still water below us even has a name, Lake St. Croix. Which brings us back to the sand. A slow, deep, lake-like river has almost no power to move gravel. It accepts whatever it is handed and it sets the load down. and every single day the Kinnickinnic hands it something. This little river drains farmland and bluff country in springs, and it comes down that gorge carrying sand and silt scoured out of its own walls. It arrives, the current dies, and the load drops. That is a delta, and it is the reason this park exists. Deltas are supposed to belong to the sea. Here one has been built inside a river, a broad sandy fan spilling out of the mouth of the Kinnickinnic into the flank of the St. Croix. It has grown big enough to shove the bigger river aside. The channel narrows to roughly a quarter of its normal width. The current speeds up, and in winter that stretch refuses to freeze. So people come. Boats nose up onto it all summer, families camp on it, and for a few months a year there is a beach in the middle of a national scenic riverway. Then autumn empties it, and it is just what it always was. A pile of Wisconsin, moved downhill 1 grain at a time by a river 22 miles long, and set down carefully in a river that used to drain a glacier. None of this was empty land. The St. Croix Valley is Dakota homeland and Ojibwe homeland, and both nations are here now, in the present tense, not only in the past. The river was a route, a boundary, and a larder. Fish in the channel, wild rice in the marshes upstream, maple sugar in the spring woods, deer in the bottomlands. The old canoe route between the St. Croix and the Bois Brule linked the Mississippi watershed to Lake Superior. It is worth being precise about what changed here, and when, because the change came very fast. The traders came first, up these rivers for fur. Then the surveyors came. Then came men with an interest in the pine, and pine is the whole story of the St. Croix. This valley grew white pine, tall and clean and light enough to float, standing on the banks of a river pointed straight at a hungry market. On the 29th of July, 1837, at a place then called St. Peter's, Ojibwe leaders met Governor Henry Dodge and signed. A treaty with the Dakota followed the same year. Together, they ceded the country between the Mississippi and the St. Croix. It is remembered as the White Pine Treaty, and the name is the point. The Ojibwe negotiators laid an oak leaf in front of Dodge to make it clear they were not surrendering the hardwoods. There is good evidence that the Ojibwe understood that agreement as a lease of the pine, not a surrender of the land itself. That is not how it was enforced. Within a few years, sawmills were running at St. Croix Falls and at Marine on St. Croix, and the valley was open for cutting. Everything in the 70 years that follow, the wealth, the towns, the stripped hills, comes out of paper signed in a single summer. The work was seasonal and it was brutal. Crews cut all winter, when frozen ground let them haul, and they stacked the logs on the ice and along the banks of the St. Croix and its tributaries. Every company stamped its own timber mark into the log ends, the way a rancher brands cattle, because every log from every camp in the valley was about to be turned loose into the same water. Then the snow melted and the rivers rose, and the whole winter's cut was let go at once. The log drive. Millions of tons of pine moving downstream on the flood with men walking on top of it. The river we are looking at carried that. It is very hard to picture from a quiet bluff on an August afternoon, but this water was once, for weeks at a time, a road made of trees. Downstream, the logs had to be caught and sorted, company by company, mark by mark. In 1856, work began on the St. Croix boom, a couple of miles above Stillwater, a system of piers and chained logs that strained the entire river. Everything the valley cut passed through it. Stillwater became the lumber capital of the St. Croix, and for 2 generations the boom was one of the busiest places on the river. Rivers, though, do not cooperate. On the 13th of June, 1886, the drive jammed near Taylor's Falls, where the channel makes a 90-degree turn at a place called Angle Rock. Logs piled into the bend and locked. Then more logs kept arriving behind them. By the time it stopped growing, somewhere between 125 and 150 million board feet of pine was stacked up in that gorge. A local reporter called it the Jammedest Jam he had ever seen. Hundreds of men worked at it for 6 weeks. They brought in steamboats. They brought in dynamite. On the 2nd of July, a 24-pound charge blew 1 million feet of logs loose and shifted 15 million more. A hermit upstream had already dynamited a dam on the Clam River over a grievance about his meadow, which raised the water, which helped. The pine did not last. It was never going to. In 1890, the valley was still turning out around 450 million board feet a year, but that was the peak, and the forest behind it was finite. The camps moved north and west. The rivers went quiet. The great white pine of the St. Croix took thousands of years to grow and about 60 years to take away. On the 12th of June, 1914, the St. Croix boom shut down for good. In its working life, it had sorted more than 15.5 billion feet of logs. Then the men went away, and the piers rotted, and the river, having been run as a machine for 2 generations, was handed back. What it got back was a watershed stripped of its forest, its banks cut over, and no clear idea what it was for. What it became, eventually, is the thing you are looking at. Second growth crept back over the bluffs, and slowly, people began to argue that the St. Croix should be left alone on purpose, not as leftover ground, but as something worth keeping because of what it is. The alternative was already visible from any high point in the valley. Cabins on every bluff and the view sold off, one lot at a time. In 1968, Congress passed the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and the St. Croix, together with its tributary the Namekagon, was among the original 8 rivers named in it. 200 miles protected in the first breath of the law, but the stretch in front of us was not included. The lower 52 miles from Taylor's Falls down to Prescott were the settled end, the busy end, and they were left out. That gap closed in 1972. On the 25th of October, the lower St. Croix was added, 52 miles of it, the first river segment Congress brought into the system after the original 8. And in that very same year, on this side of the water, 3 families who owned these bluffs, the Pembles, the Cresswells, and the Richters, gave 45 acres to the state, and Kinnickinnic State Park was created. Why they did it is no mystery. Through the 1960s, the Twin Cities were spreading east across the river, and this bluff country on the Wisconsin side was next in line. The families decided the view was worth more standing than sold. The Save Our St. Croix Association pushed for a park. The Minnesota-Wisconsin Boundary Area Commission carried the proposal, and the Natural Resources Board made it real. Those 45 acres are now more than 1,200. The river that gives the park its name has quietly become famous for something else entirely. The Kinnickinnic is a Class 1 trout stream, which in Wisconsin means it holds wild trout that reproduce on their own without stocking. Brook trout are native here. Brown trout, introduced long ago, now breed in it too, and surveys have counted up to 8,000 trout in a single mile of this water. That is several times what the state calls excellent. It is not untouched. 2 dams still sit on the Kinney up in River Falls, and their ponds go warm and shallow and green in summer, which is exactly what a cold water river cannot afford. In 2018, the City Council voted unanimously to take them out. The plan puts the first removal in the middle of this decade and the second in the decades after. Then the Kinney runs free from its springs to this sand. Meanwhile, the park just keeps doing what parks do. More than 140 species of birds pass through here on migration, and 85 to 90 stay for the summer. Wild turkeys, long gone from this country, were brought back in 1989 and never left. Deer and beaver and mink work the bottoms. 88 acres of this gorge and delta were made a state natural area in 1980, a promise to leave them alone. And the sand keeps arriving. That is the thing to carry out of here. The ice is gone, the pine is gone, the boom is gone, the mills are gone, and the little brown river still comes down its gorge every single day and lays another handful of Wisconsin into the St. Croix. Nothing in this valley is finished. It is only slow. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.